So just a reminder, the ground rules for this panel are the same as the one in the morning. Each participant will get 10 minutes, and I'll be there kind of trying to signal when you have sort of 2 minutes left. I'll just do one formality, which is introduce the chair to this session, Professor Sukhdev Thorat, who needs no introduction to this group. He has been a regular participant in all the regional TTI meetings. He's worn many hats. He's a very distinguished economist, did some pioneering work on agriculture, and we were hoping he would be here yesterday but couldn't make it. He's been chairman of the University Grants Commission, chairman for the Indian Council for Social Science Research, and has done extraordinarily pioneering work on the theme of this panel on social inclusion, public service, and inequality. So we are really honored that you could be with us to chair this session. Just one more announcement, one little request we have of all of you, that when we break for lunch, immediately after we break for lunch, we will assemble for a group photograph. This is one of those kind of nice mementos and a documentary requirement we need in the amphitheater that is in front of the breakfast hall. It's apparently just set up for a large group photograph. So it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. But when we break for lunch, please proceed to that amphitheater. We'll quickly do a group photograph, and then we can return to our lunch here. Initially, we thought of doing the photograph tomorrow, but I think it's probably best to do it today before people start dispersing. So over to you, Professor Thorat. And I said each participant has 10 minutes, and that will leave some time for questions from the floor.
Okay, good morning. Welcome to this session on poverty, development, inclusion, and public service delivery system. I understand it's a very important theme. Ultimately, the goal of development or increase in income is to reduce poverty and increase the well-being of the people. But at the same time, we do in a manner such that everybody is included. Therefore, we now began to talk about inclusive growth or a pro-poor growth. And at the same time, beside income, we need services which are generally provided by the public bodies in the government, education, health, water, and all others. So this is going to be a very interesting session. I am told that each speaker will get 10 minutes. We have a very strong lineup, NCR, IIDS, SIPA, SPDC, Karachi, ASDPI, Islamabad, and SIPA, Colombo, and IIDS, Delhi, and NCR, Delhi. Well, then let me begin with NCR first. I did not mention the name. Revili is associated with a very, very important project on data, panel data in NCR, and this data is so important that it's used all over the world. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm here to talk to you today about one thing that NCAR and University of Maryland have partnered with for at least the last dozen years on the Indian Human Development Survey. We've had two waves of this, one in 2004-05, a second one that we just released, the data we just released in 2011-12, and we are in the midst of planning our third wave here. I want to start by, of course, thanking all our funders. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, knows how important that funding is, and we couldn't be able to do any of our work without the generous support of these funders, and we only hope that we can live up to the promises that they see in us. Okay, just a quick overview of the survey. We have about 40,000 households spread across all of India, about 200,000 individuals. We have special modules on youth, on ever married women between 15 and 49, a small module on young children 8 to 11. In addition, we have modules on villages, on medical facilities in those villages and urban neighborhoods, and on schools there. Okay, so people always ask us, why one more survey? India is full of wonderful surveys. The census, the National Sample Survey, NFHS, the district level health surveys. India is deluged with very good data. But our mission is trying to fulfill a certain gap in there because these great surveys are all cross-sectional and they're all more or less single issue surveys. So our niche in this field is to be a multi-topic survey to study characteristics that enable us to study the relationships across characteristics, not just levels of one characteristic. And we are a panel study, so we can study how households change. None of this I'm sure you can read from your seats, but the idea is we cover almost every available issue that you can think of in terms of what this panel is composed of. Exclusion, income, gender. We try to be a fairly comprehensive survey. We may not ask quite as many questions as NSS does on consumption or poverty, but we ask a little bit of everything. This enables us to do 2 or 3 things. First of all, we can analyze relationships across several dimensions of human development. So India has wonderful surveys on mortality, wonderful surveys on fertility, wonderful surveys on poverty, okay? But I need to be closer, okay. But if you want to relate mortality and poverty to fertility rates, you're in trouble because they're in different surveys. So we have a little bit of something on every topic. We have a broad range of papers, and because we have this, you can write about almost any topic you're interested in using IHDS. We posted a few posters out there that range from analyses of toilets to analyses of PDS to gender dimensions of development, and there's almost anything you would want to look at is in IHDS. It also appeals, and another thing actually you should notice about the posters is that they're all done by separate people. One of the wonderful things that we have been able to benefit from with our partnership with NCAR is the wonderful infrastructure that they are able to provide us so that we're able to build a team of researchers to do all these different analyses. I'm fortunate to have our latest member of the team, Sadika Baga, has just joined us and from D-School, and we're very pleased to have this growing team. But I wanted to mention the infrastructure because I know it's important for TTI, but it's been very important to us because that support provides the background. It enables the researchers to think about the social science and the social policy issues rather than having to worry about sort of the social composition of your staff, okay? Somebody else can do all those, do all that stuff while we can concentrate on the research issues, and that's been a very important for us. The survey also reaches a wide range of development scholars. We've had a lot of public use. We've had over 3,000 people download the data. We recently just put up the second wave of the data in about August 1st, and within the first month we had over 1,000 downloads of the data. So it's become very widely used. And I encourage any of you to download it. The second part of the IHDS niche is panel data. And panel data allows new questions to be asked, and it allows more powerful statistical models. I want to especially emphasize the new questions here. I just want to give you sort of 2 examples, just a flavor of the sorts of things that you can do with panel data that we can't do with cross-sectional data. First, poverty dynamics, work that's been led by Amit Torat, who is well known to at least some people on the panel. And this work on poverty shows how important it is to look at household changes. So cross-sectional studies of poverty can tell us what the levels of poverty are, okay? But they hide the fact that there's actually a lot of fluidity. A lot of people, while poverty rates are going down, a lot of people are exiting poverty. At the same time, okay, many households are newly entering poverty. And we need to know the dynamics of what are the factors that help explain why that help families lift out of poverty, and what are the other factors that push some of them back down in. And you can do that with panel data, as you can observe both processes. So this is just the quick marginals, and we see that if we look at the 2004-05 study, those who were poor in 2004-05, the vast majority of them escaped poverty by the last 7 years. And of course, that's part of the Indian story of economic growth. So about twice as many of the original poor escaped poverty as stayed in it. On the other hand, there is a significant block of families who were not poor in 2005 and fell into poverty in 2012. And so understanding that dynamic process, that families are moving in both directions, is very important. And when you run that by different social groups, because we want to talk about inclusion and exclusion, what we see is a not unsurprising story. The yellow lines, which are new entrants into poverty, show that the more disadvantaged groups, Dalits and Adivasis, have much higher rates of falling into poverty, but they also have much lower rates of escaping poverty over the 7 years. The second piece I want to talk about was an analysis of mortality. Again, panel data are absolutely necessary to study mortality. What we want to know is what types of people have higher risks of mortality. And so we can go out and count the amounts of mortality, but we have very little information about what they were like before, because even our wonderful colleagues at NCR haven't yet figured out how to interview dead people. So with panel data, what we have is information in 2005, and we can see what's happened to them 7 years later. So the question that Debasis was asking was, well, we know wealth helps protect you against mortality. We know that if you are currently disabled or currently have a chronic illness, you're more likely to die over the 7 years. But how do those two things work together? And so we have the red bars are people who were healthy in 2005, and the yellow bars are people who reported some sort of disability or chronic illness in 2005. And so not surprisingly, the yellow bars are much higher. You know, if you start out ill, you have much higher risk of dying. Reading across the table, from poor to relatively affluent, we see that they go down, so that reinforces the idea that the wealthy have lower risk of poverty. But what's of interest to Debasis and what was of interest to us was that the slope of the yellow bars is much stronger than the slope of the red bars. So that what wealth does is it helps everybody, but it really helps if you're sick, okay? And it's the poor who are sick that have the highest risk. Okay. But because of the publicly available data, I'm sure others will find even more interesting things to look at. And I want to encourage you and all the people you work with to take a look at this data and explore its possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for keeping exactly to 2 minutes, Sue. Now I invite Director of IIDS, Sangamitra C.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Mehta, for giving this opportunity. Uh, I stand here to argue a slightly different case that we've been discussing since yesterday. Across research, there has been the concern for development, the concern for how best can be the parity between different groups that we have, the constituents of the population. And there are references that if you take care of poverty, many disparities which are across different axes like caste, religion, gender will be taken care of. I stand here to argue a little differently, and that also happens to be the mandate of the institute that I'm representing. Would just want you to take note of the notion of poverty as it's moved beyond perhaps the three dimensions which have been used earlier in terms of health, education, and perhaps standard of living, to almost about 10 indicators which are now being used, which range from child mortality to nutrition to education to civic amenities, including cooking fuel, etc. And we see that there are disparities which exist between the two sets of populations that I'm drawing upon to make comparisons. Of course, marginalities and deprivations exist beyond the group that I'm going to focus on, but then I think I wouldn't have enough time to talk about. So I'm going to restrict between the differentials which exist between the Dalits and the non-Dalits. If you look at this very simple data generated by National Family Health Survey almost about 10 years ago, we see that the differential between non-poor, poor association vis-a-vis Dalit and non-Dalit categories, we see that a larger share of poor is concentrating among those who are Dalits or SCs, which is the way it's listed over here. And conversely, among the non-SCs, there's a large share of the population which has been concentrating in the highest wealth quintile. So the pointer that is that there is a concentration in terms of the poverty and the caste identity debate that I'm trying to draw towards. Similarly, if we look at some other indicators also, look at the children of the scheduled caste groups who engage in work, even though they are not supposed to be working during those ages. So almost 12% as against those who are non-scheduled caste from the non-scheduled caste communities. Look at what's happening in education. The young people also, I mean, the deprivation is far more among the scheduled caste children, young people, as compared to those who aren't there. The total population also, almost half of the SCs remain without education as compared to about 1/4 of the non-Dalits. Exposure to the media also tells us a similar story. And then if you look at what are the problems women face in terms of accessing certain healthcare services within the domain that can be accessible to them. If you look at the bar, which is blue in color, and is talking about the monetary aspect of being able to access any service, there is a differential between the women who belong to the marginalized groups versus those who don't. Almost 1/5 of them who belong to the marginalized group cannot access because of the monetary reason, as compared to about 13% who are from the non-Dalit communities. Similarly, distance, an idea such as distance can also be obstructing the access to the service. And this perhaps therefore becomes something like a vicious cycle which doesn't allow what is required to be able to generate that propensity in terms of being educated, in terms of being healthy, in terms of being able to therefore contribute to the economy, and then the feeding into back the whole viciousness of being the perpetuation of poverty. Some of the indicators which could be considered as the outcome indicators between, again, the Dalits and the non-Dalits, while out of the total populations, 66% of the Dalits remain poor, as against about 1/3 of the non-Dalits, the IMR situations are also, the infant mortality situations are also far more among the scheduled caste children as compared to the non-scheduled caste. Undernourishment, again, it's a similar scenario. Institutional delivery also, there's a similar story. Now, these data do talk about the outcome of the certain processes which have led to these situations. Now, the outcome which have been such, there are processes which have led to these, have certain bases within what's happening in context of the local social milieux in which these communities are located. And that's what perhaps becomes important to disaggregate the research mandate and see what's and how of the vulnerable populations and the linkages why the deprivation and the marginalization continues. And some of the relevance which I can again draw upon from the data already existing, almost 70% of the Dalits do live in the rural areas, 90% of them are engaged in the agriculture sector and continue to remain unskilled laborers. And most of them are employed in absolutely minimal jobs to the extent of being cleaners of the sewerage, toilets, and so on, which other workers will not even imagine to be doing. So I think, and the references of these processes perhaps can be captured not really in context of the data. Most data sets don't really tell us about the processes, they largely tell us about the outcomes, but the processes are often tapped by the other data sets which could be more local and more qualitative in nature. And some of the reflections which I'm reflecting to you on the screen are in terms of the processes. For example, the midday meals wherein a Dalit cook is involved go waste because they're not supposed to be consumed by the children who are non-Dalits. Similarly, look at what's happened in the state of Gujarat. I mean, the child is not given the polio drops because of the reasons such as untouchability, which we claim to have sort of done away with ages ago. So the contention I'm trying to make is that the research on purpose has to be intended to look at these marginalities. Only then will be able to actually address what we are considering, that the poverty would be able to do that minimization which is required. I mean, this again tells us a story of biases which exist for certain groups existing in the population. I mean, 32,000 odd populations remain experiencing atrocities. And if you look at what's happening in terms of, and these are perhaps the legislative measures, despite the legislative measures, we continue to sort of keep listening, keep getting the news, and any newspaper any day will be full of news items such as these. Just a reflection on the bias, as if you look at the number of people languishing in the jails versus the share of their population, I mean, it's extremely, one needs to pay attention to it. I mean, if it's about 17% of Dalits as a share of the population, 22% of them are languishing in the jails, and similarly on the basis of the perhaps religious identities too. So what I'm trying to argue is that there is a need to look at the disaggregated impressions which are created by the empirical evidences, and then create a case for looking at how the processes of marginalities work to bring in these disparities, and what could be the best ways to address these measures of disparity. Institute's work does address these issues, and we have managed to take note of these contentions and even talk to convey to the policy makers and impress upon them in the field of education, in the field of housing, in the field of most contextual issues through the research which has emanated from the institute. I would end over here and wait for the questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Now let me invite Wagesa from CPA, Sri Lanka, Colombo.
to do in the next 10 minutes is to share with you some dominant narratives that are emerging from SEPA's current work on post-war development and urbanization, and moot the idea of reimagining post-war prosperity in a country that is in transition, not only from war to post-war, whatever that is, but also from low income to middle income, like Sri Lanka. Reimagining Development, much like Southern Voice, was an initiative that emerged in 2012, TTI Exchange, I believe, I wasn't there. And since then, SEPA has taken steps to shape our research agenda in a way that leads us to reimagine development. So I don't have any data for you. What I have is a string of narratives. Look at the 2 10-rupee coins that were minted after the war ended in Sri Lanka in 2009. The one for Colombo, which is that one on the left side, has the World Trade Center and the Bank of Ceylon. And the one for Batticaloa, which is this one on the right side, a district in the eastern seaboard that was severely affected by the war, has now on its coin a famous luxury tourist resort by the name of Malu Malu. To some, the fact that these corporate powerhouses are engraved in a state coin represents prosperity in the post-war period. 6 years after the end of the Civil War, the state is ambitiously pursuing a model of development aimed at rapid GDP growth, supported by expansive tourism and large-scale business trade-oriented developments. The increase in the GDP per capita by 6.6% after the war ended, and the drop in the poverty headcount ratio from around 9% to 6.7% are touted as indicators of this prosperity. To many that live in Batticaloa, these are symbols of capitalist penetration by Colombo-based big business and the extraction of resources and labor from the already dispossessed people in these war-affected communities. In a recent study on the political economy of tourism development in Batticaloa, conducted by SEPA, we came across many who told us that luxury tourist resorts such as Malu Malu, which, by the way, is built a few meters away from a mass grave of civilians that were massacred during the war, symbolize singular domination over Tamil lands and resources. The coin minted for Colombo, which is now on its way to become a megapolis, hides the reality that our main urban center presents the most intense coexistence of opposites, especially wealth and poverty, rightlessness and resistance, formality and informality, opportunities and exclusion, and coexistence and conflict. SEPA's current research on urban evictions that the minister yesterday also referred to shows that in some respects, inequalities and disparities within the city of Colombo mirror or even exceed rural and urban disparities. This is one part of our post-war story. Here's another part. This involves development interventions by non-state actors. Many INGOs comply with the orthodox equation that building state capacity to provide basic services contributes to state building via its possible effects on state legitimacy. And they invest in a lot of service delivery projects in the war-affected areas. However, SEPA's research finds, as part of a survey and other studies conducted by the Secure Livelihoods Global Research Consortium, that there is no consistent nor a linear relationship between access to or satisfaction with services and people's perceptions of government actors. This finding challenges the continued preoccupation of donor agencies and a number of governments with achieving state legitimacy through service delivery. This finding also threw up an important question to the donor community on state legitimacy in contexts where state is a party to conflict. is it really realistic to talk about reconstruction and state legitimacy in contexts where the state may not have really felt an impulse to be legitimate? Second, who provides humanitarian and development assistance does not seem to make a difference in the context of Sri Lanka, according to this survey. This challenges the notion that in post-conflict or post-war settings, non-state actors need to transition out of providing services rather quickly in order to avoid crowding out of government, undermining capacity building and state building efforts. This questions another binary in development practice. It tells us that the preoccupation of delivering services either through the government or through external agencies isn't useful anymore. The other orthodox practice that is questioned by our recent work on livelihoods and indebtedness in post-war areas is this trend towards independent and entrepreneurship initiatives and livelihoods projects that run parallel to the increasing financialization of development. From the Bangladesh model of microfinance, epitomized by, of course, the Grameen Bank, which seeks to invest and implement systems of service delivery and human development managed by NGOs, the development industry has now joined hands with the global finance industry. What is at stake here is a crucial shift from the idea of development as social services and the improvement of human capital to development as integration into global financial markets. This has led to consumption on credit by people who live in war-affected areas that throw them into a mire of debt, especially in their fragile situation where livelihoods have been troubled by the lack of a steady income. This situation has come about in Sri Lanka today due to the fact that microfinance seems as a lucrative profit center among financial service providers, there being no regulatory mechanism in place. All financial service providers are promoting themselves as providers of microfinance to the poor and the marginalized. This practice also marks a trend among INGOs towards responsibilizing, I'm going to use that as a verb for now, those who are already dispossessed as a consequence of the war. In the absence of a proper transitional justice mechanism, which ideally should consider addressing indebtedness in war-affected areas as a form of reparation, the situation of these people seem to only worsen. So the gains from this multi-pronged development intervention are believed to be an antidote to conflict-induced problems in our country. This model, of course, has a long history. In the period after World War II, particularly given the backdrop of the Marshall Plan aid to Europe, economic growth and reconstruction of post-war states formed the core of the idea and the process of development. This view further crystallized by the likes of the World Bank and the IMF that advocated the view that technical and economic solutions, particularly the transfer of capital, technology, and much later sound institutions, would help develop nations. So the prescribed recipe for lasting peace, as devised by the development industry, was and still is free market economy based on the neoliberal criteria and the establishment of a liberal democracy. Relatedly, post-war and post-conflict are understood as superficial and arbitrarily set time periods when fighting stops and peace building begins. Assuming that this so-called post-war or post-conflict period offers a fresh start that is distinctively different from the period of war or conflict, playing catch-up with economic growth is automatically set as a goal, and dominant ideas about development and prosperity begin to steamroll and flatten diverse visions of peaceful and desirable society into a colossal and sort of monolithic vision. And in conceptualizing and executing these processes, both state and non-state actors have so far failed to tackle issues of identity politics, which often is the elephant in the room, reconciliation, and state building in any meaningful way. Non-state actors operating in the mindset of a Weberian state, of course, cannot understand how matters of identity politics strongly linked to state building and continue to do what they know best, which in many ways is the easy thing to do. There are too many vanity projects that are not productive. And at the end of these projects, they spend a lot of money on an impact monitoring exercise and perhaps even employing an RCT, wash their hands off and move on to the next project in Sri Lanka or in the next post-war hotspot. Our post-war research tells us that the illusion of prosperity and that triggered the obsession with this large-scale capitalist expansion eschews the political. It betrays the lack of concern for the ramifications of Sri Lanka's conflict and an ignorance of the social, political, and cultural factors that impact how development is not only received but also perceived, particularly in the war-affected areas. And many donors are culpable of supporting this vision of development, post-war development. This is the last slide. Our research urges both state and non-state actors to revisit the fundamentals when it comes to post-war development. The evidence that stems from our research so far may not be what these actors want to hear or see. It's difficult to digest, and as Ajay Dixit yesterday mentioned, this is uncomfortable knowledge. Through our research, we have tried to get to grips with the processes that drive and constrain development in a detailed and a granular way. What we see here emerge is a clear critique of the dominant model, which is an economics of politics and an expose of what is distinctively political about politics. That is power, agency, interests, ideas, building coalitions, and the impact of contingency, all of which are missing from the dominant development model and the discourse. When this is the case, how do we get the state and the donors to see that our research on post-war development is relevant and that they need to make drastic changes in how they are going about this? I must say that this is extremely challenging, but it's not impossible. And SEPA has had a few successes so far. Our impact on government policymakers on urban evictions and our forthcoming engagement with the government on creating a framework of inclusion for the hospitality industry are some examples. As most of you might know, in Sri Lanka, the space for think tanks or any civil society organization to engage with the state was restricted until the beginning of this year. We believe that there is currently a policy window, albeit a honeymoon, and we want to take advantage of this and use our evidence to push the state and non-state actors also to think about the soft side of development, if you will. The fact that SEPA has had a couple of long-term initiatives that allow flexibility to respond to changing context and collaboration with other think tanks and individuals have given us a good opportunity to build a good stock of well-researched ideas on post-war development, with which we can react and respond to the sudden appearance of a policy window. It has afforded SEPA researchers the luxury to experiment with big ideas that have led to several logical leaps of mind, if you will. There's great value in such long-term initiatives for think tanks, and I request the donors here that are present to support efforts of this nature. Yesterday, Sarah Lucas asked us to share what a dream funder is, right? And here it is. Please do think about funding long-term initiatives that provide researchers to think big, provides that room to think big. Motivated by our recent work on post-war development, we have plans to fashion our future research agenda in a way that accommodates our researchers to imagine a new future, changed or created by the adoption of their next new big idea for Sri Lanka's post-war recovery. This way, SEPA does not need to focus on metrics that reflect our relative contribution to a broad policy process. Our initiatives can then tackle problems that we consider need to be tackled and success is easily defined by the observation that our big ideas have been accepted and implemented. Like many other think tanks, we have also had the experience of getting muddled up with ongoing commentary and illusions of influence based on the incorrect assumption that visibility equals influence when we have focused on broad policy issues and projects. By focusing on large initiatives like Reimagining Development, we believe that we can report on successes more easily than when we are driven by externally designed projects and broad policy research programs or groups even. This also helps the organization to learn lessons that may be transferable from initiative to initiative, just as one would transfer lessons from one rugby game to the next and to the next. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I request the speaker to confine to 10 minutes, otherwise we will spend 15 minutes and we won't have time for discussion. I invite now the SPDC Karachi.
Well, thank you. Yes. I would like to share, rather than going into detailed methodological issues or something like that, I would just like to share a couple of unexpected findings from the research, two pieces of research that SPDC has conducted over the last 2 years or so. One is on the estimating of provincial economies, like the GDP, we can say the gross regional product, and the others on the estimation of poverty. Just to give you a little background, that in Pakistan, the national income accounts, or GDP, is prepared, estimated and presented at national level. So we don't have estimates about the provinces. So that's why we think that our research, these findings have added to some existing knowledge, at least in the context of Pakistan. And let me also acknowledge that this work was done by our colleagues at SPDC. So in Pakistan, as I mentioned, that we don't have official estimates of provincial economies, GDPs, and that's why in 2005, SPDC made an effort to estimate the provincial economies. The research was based on earlier work that one of our colleagues did for his PhD thesis. So in 2005, it was provincial economies that SPDC did. Then this work was taken forward by World Bank and Asian Development Bank and other organizations. And then taking that work to the next stage, 2 years ago, we tried to estimate this, decompose the GDP into urban and rural thing. Because all these, urban, rural, and provincial economies, they have implications for inclusive growth and equitable development policies. So overall, what we see from this research that in Pakistan, the population proportion of urban rural is like 60-40, 63% urban and 63% rural and 37% urban. But the GDP, when we decompose this, it's a 50-50 economy. 50% of GDP comes from rural areas and 50% comes from urban areas. It's roughly 50, it could be 49.5 or something like that. But the major work that we were focused on to estimate the size and the structure of the rural economy. General perception usually is that the rural areas have only agriculture and they don't have significant level of other activities. So what we estimated that agriculture is only 38% of the rural economy. And to the contrary to our expectation, services sector was the dominant sector in rural economy that has like 41% share, and also we have a significant share of industry. So that was kind of breaking a myth that rural is not only about agriculture. So when we talk about agriculture, rural areas, we talk about agriculture. So any sectoral policies, the debate doesn't involve rural economy. When we talk rural economy, it doesn't talk about service sector and industry sector. So this was very unexpected result that services sector, which includes transportation, communication, retail, and wholesale trade, and so on and so forth, and public administration, social service delivery. So 41% was very unexpected result that rural areas are not about agriculture. And overall the contribution to GDP of rural areas. So rural areas contribute 42% of the services sector in overall Pakistan's economy, and they contribute 39% in the industrial sector. So implication of this research is that when we talk about policies regarding sectoral, policies like services sector or industrial sector, so the debate shouldn't be driven by the a priori assumptions that it's when we talk about services, people talk about banking services, financial services, consultancies. So it's all about urban, but we have a big share of rural areas in the services as well as 39% in the total GDP in industry. So that I think it will inform, and it has to some certain extent inform the policy debate that we should take these things into account. So that was the first kind of unexpected finding that we got from the estimation of provincial economies. And the second one is about estimating the poverty. SPDC has been doing this for years now, that we provide the estimates of incidence of poverty, and usually it's always based on the national level data that is prepared by, which is called the Pakistan Social Living Standard Measurement Survey, and it is conducted by the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics. So we don't conduct surveys, we use that data to estimate the, it's basically the consumption poverty. So again, in the poverty arena, mostly the debate is on overall poverty, and then urban poverty and rural poverty. Okay, urban poverty is, for example, 20%, and rural poverty is 25%. So people talk about the inequality between urban areas and rural areas. In Pakistan, and this estimate is not very latest, because the latest data of PSLM, this Living Standard Survey, was released a month ago, I think. So it was earlier data that was released in 2013-14. So in rural areas, 37.3% of population is living below the poverty line, and in urban areas it's 35.8. So sometimes, it depends on the years of the survey. Sometimes the difference is large, sometimes it's not that large. So all the debate is around what are the differences between urban and rural poverty and how to address these issues. So, but what SPDC did, we decomposed the urban areas, the poverty. So the rural, as I mentioned, was 37.3%. So the decomposition was based on the large, because again, when we talk about urban areas, what comes into our mind is large cities like Karachi, Lahore, Hyderabad, Rawalpindi, Islamabad, whatever. So we decompose this data into large cities and small cities and towns. Large mean populations having, the cities having population of more than 500,000 or so. So there were like 15 plus cities, they come into that. And as with regard to the population, urban population, it's 60-40. Like 60% of urban population in Pakistan lives in large cities and 40% lives in smaller cities and towns. So then we saw that in large cities, if you see in the last slide, I mentioned that overall urban poverty was around 35%. But large cities, it's only 26.4%. But what was unexpected, that the small cities and towns, almost 48% of the population was living below the poverty line. And this is the segment of population, we don't talk about this in Pakistan. We talk about rural areas, we talk about urban areas. But this research has shown that, when we are talking about targeting poverties, targeting people for reducing poverties, and we usually have two types of things. One is like when we talk about rural, okay, we have to go to the remote areas and provide assistance, provide service delivery or whatever. Then when we talk about cities or urban areas, we talk about slums. So this is the segment of the population which lives in small cities and town, and it was very, unexpected for us that 48%, almost half of the population was living below the poverty line, and no one was talking about this population. So I think these were the two striking results that I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the last speaker, Imran Khalid from SDPI, Islamabad.
Thank you. My name is Imran Khalid. I'm with Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Islamabad. And this is kind of a trial by fire for me because the presentation was supposed to be delivered by my executive director, but he has asked me at the beginning of the session to go ahead and do the best I can, considering I've been with the organization for the past 6 weeks. So yeah, right. So this is definitely a light moment, and I'm glad everyone's having a laugh at my expense. I apologize to my colleagues for typing away on my laptop while they were speaking, but rest assured, I was paying attention to what you were saying as well. So I've been with SDPI for the past 6 weeks. SDPI was formed in the aftermath of the Rio conference, the first Sustainable Development Conference in Rio de Janeiro. And one of the major things that came out of that conference was discussion about poverty and environment and social development. And over the past 20 years plus, SDPI has ensured that social development, the environment poverty nexus, they stay as the focal point of the organization. So I'll discuss a few projects, and then I'll end with by highlighting a recent study on taxes that SDPI has done. But first of all, let me start with a quote by Aristotle on poverty. And what he said was that poverty is the parent of revolution and crime. SDPI believes in inclusive development and improvement in the standard of living of masses. It has done a number of studies, conducted a number of analyses on trying to understand how sustainable development goals can be linked with national policy and plans. We understand that the difference between haves and have-nots is increasing day by day in South Asia and in Pakistan in particular. The urban-rural divide is one such context. It burdens the service delivery. There are concerns about education and health services. With respect to education, SDPI has done a number of studies. I'll mention a couple here. One is trying to understand the intergenerational transitions and social relations that result from schooling sons and daughters in poor households. It looks at how the children, whether they're able to take what's been provided to them by their parents or by the school, and whether they're able to transfer that education and skills into a better future for themselves. The other research that is ongoing and that Saudi is heading right now is the Alif Alan district ranking system, where we've taken, this is the first time it's happening, and there's a direct link between education and poverty. So if the districts that are found to be lacking in terms of providing better education are also the ones that are lagging behind financially and are more liable to be poor. One other issue that we are looking at SDPI is migration, rural to urban transition, for example. Um, Pakistan has been hammered by terrorist attacks, and extremists are finding individuals who are moving from rural areas to urban areas, and they're tapping into that potential, and people who don't have any jobs are finding them, are being induced into an extremist setup. So that's another aspect of it. Climate change, we've talked about climate change in the previous session, and that is also an important aspect when it comes to internal migration. SDPI has also looked at child labor, and it has done surveys on children in the worst forms of child labor in various districts of the Punjab province. And finally, let me conclude by highlighting this tax study that SDPI has done. It's an analysis of tax directory of 2014 and 15, and it shows it's a cause of grave concern for all Pakistanis. A number of, as many as 25,000 companies filed their tax returns with zero income, including renowned entities such as the Pakistan Television. The study shows that indirect tax system is aggressive and biased against the poor. Pakistan, with a population nearing 200 million people, has, and would anyone wager a guess as to how many taxpayers we might have? Just give me a figure. Yeah. 3 million? Anyone else? 100,000. So it's somewhere in between that. It's less than a million. It's less than a million. Yep. We've got less than a million tax filers. Only 49 out of a total, the SDPI study shows that only 49 out of a total of 64,950 companies of the corporate sector have paid more than 1 billion rupees income tax, while 39% companies have filed their returns with zero tax during the fiscal year of 2014 and 15. The research shows that in 2012, only 0.7 million people actually paid income tax. This comes to 2 per 100 people employed. Of all the lawmakers in the national provincial assemblies, 61% do not pay their taxes. 51% of the senators and 62% of the cabinet ministers do not file their tax returns. So this is just what's coming out of the research study, and this kind of sets the platform for what needs to be done when it comes to reducing poverty. And taxes, you can go to jail for taxing in a number of countries, in any number of countries. In Pakistan, no one has ever gone to jail for not paying their taxes. And it's not like people do not know who those people are who are not paying taxes. It's just that it doesn't happen. Due to tax exemptions, Pakistan loses rupees 500 billion annually, which is 5 times the annual school budget. We have a low school budget to start with, but when, this is monies that can be used to enhance our education system, but it's not happening. In 1994 and 95, 30% of the poor remained poor if they were born in a poor family. That's gone to above 40% now. So if you're born in a poor family, it's, there's chances of upward mobility are very low. The divide between rich and poor, it varies from province to province. As I said, Pakistan is a country of 200 million people. We've got insurgency in a couple of our provinces, and it's having a tax base such as this, having a poor educational system, it all feeds into the malaise. So what's SDPI doing, or what is it that we are trying to do that's at least contributing to the betterment of what's happening? So one thing is advocacy. We are working with print and television and radio to publicize what the outputs that we have. The study that I just mentioned, it's been picked up by a number of media outlets. We invite government officials and politicians to SDPI and have them talk about it, and they come face to face with the researchers, and a lot of times the researchers point blank ask them, have you paid your taxes, and what's going on with your political party? And so this is one way of interacting. It's the politicians keep coming back because they know that we are an unbiased organization. We've got relationship with academia as well, and finally, our relationship with funders and donors and organizations such as those present in this room are also important, because then we can learn from what's happening in other parts of the world. I'll leave you, I started off with a quote on poverty, and I'll leave you with a quote on poverty by Moss Hart. Boredom is the keynote of poverty. Of all its indignities, it is perhaps the hardest of all to live with. For where there is no money, there is no change of any kind. Okay, thank you.